the Evolution Security Podcast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to welcome you guys to the show. I'm here with my twin brother, Aaron. How are you doing this evening?
Brother, I'm doing great. It's always great to get together and have these conversations.
As always. And unfortunately, Brian's out there getting after it this evening, so he couldn't be with us. But he's out there learning, which is what this show's about. So
that's right.
We've got an incredible guest this evening in Chuck Haggard. We'll get him in here in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and hit real quick on our sponsors. As you guys know, we're really into jiu-jitsu. You know, our previous show, we had world-class jiu-jitsu athlete Lachlan Giles on the show. Was a really good show. So we'd like to talk about Origin USA, which is one of our sponsors. They have some of the best equipment, jiu-jitsu-wise, and supplements that there is, made in the U.S., and their gis are luxurious. You know, Aaron and I talk about it all the time. I'm going to use that term continually. They're some of the best gis, if not the best. I would say they are the best.
Oh, I believe they're the best for sure.
So, some of the other best gis that I've handled out there are owned. They don't even come close, in my opinion. So check them out at originmain.com. And at checkout, you can use EvoSec10 for 10% off. So please go and support them as they support us.
Yeah, and also, Eric, we need to remind our listeners that we are giving away that really cool Origin 1776 rash guard. They just need to go to our website at evosec.org and then sign up for our newsletter, and then they can be in that drawing. And also a reminder that if you are already on our newsletter list, you are already in that drawing. So what else do you have, buddy?
Next, I'd like to mention Tenacor. Jeff Mao and his crew at Tenacor have been with us from the get-go, and they are some incredible guys that walk the walk. You know, those guys all train. Every ECQC that we've hosted recently, the Tenacor crew is there getting after it with us. So please support them because, you know, that they do the work and they build their gear around that work. So visit their website at tenacor.com, and you can use EvoSec at checkout for 10% off. Aaron, I'm sure you're probably wearing your Velo right now, or one of them, right?
Hey, was dry firing it just before we started this show, buddy. Yeah, awesome holster. I love it.
Yeah, that's been a big comfort for me in my travels, has been my Velo, and I just got my dry fire done about 12 hours ago. I'm going to hit it up here pretty soon after my workout. But without further ado, Aaron, do we want to go ahead and get to this interview?
Oh, man. Yeah, we have lots to cover. So, yeah, I'm excited to get into it. Let's do it. We've got Marshal Chuck Haggard with us. Chuck, welcome to the show. We really appreciate you coming on.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Now, everyone, go ahead and check out Chuck's training company, which is Agile Training and Consulting, and that's at agiletactical.com, agiletactical.com. So, Chuck, why don't you go ahead, for some of our listeners that may not be aware of you, why don't you give a quick background and what you are up to these days?
I'm in right now my 34th year of law enforcement. something like that. I retired from Topeka, Kansas Police Department in 2014. Did some side work for a sheriff's department in our area north of town, and then took a job at the airport here in Topeka. That's police, fire, air crash rescue. So I've been doing that. Right now, I'm working in a training capacity with the law enforcement training, firearms use force, things like that. On the side, I'm a national trainer for National Law Enforcement Training Center out of Kansas City, Missouri, adjunct instructor for Strategos International, and have my own gig that I do with the Agile training and consulting. So, yeah, some of my friends tell me I'm bad at retiring, and they seem to be right about that.
That sounds like a good problem most of the time, but. Now, so it sounds like you were doing some training this weekend, right?
Yeah, I was down in Shawnee, Oklahoma area at the Meade Hall firearms range. And it's an excellent range, excellent facility. Bill Armstrong put together down there. And one of my mentors, Tom Gibbons, was putting a shotgun instructor class on there. So I participated in that, and I was honored to help him teach a block on weapon retention during that.
Great. Yeah, we love Tom, and I've taken some courses from him, and we're hoping in the near future to have him on also.
Super good dude.
Oh, yeah. He's a to-the-point guy for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I enjoy that in people.
Well, I can tell that about you too. In this time of basically cop hate, I've seen you talk a lot about on social media, everything that's going on. It's for those of us that know lots of great officers and know that the situation that they're in and how tough their jobs are. And then all of a sudden, a major public swell against them and pure hate that is getting many of them just executed as they're sitting in their cars. Now, it's definitely a heavier movement than we've seen like this, and these things have come and gone, but this definitely seems to be the most intense. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, if you're a student of history, we've seen this before, late 60s, early 70s. A lot of hate for law enforcement, riots, bombings of police stations. If you think back to the time of like the Sudanese Liberation Army, the original Black Panthers from the late 60s, early 70s, people like Patty Hearst, all the stuff that was going on there. Basically, there was a big movement to overthrow the government, start a new society, that sort of thing. And people were doing stuff like assassinating officers out on patrol, putting bombs in police cars, bombs in police stations, robbing banks, robbing armored cars to fund basically insurgent activity. We've seen stuff like this before, but a lot of people who are involved in this either have short memories or weren't alive at that time. I was a kid and I moved around a lot because my dad was in the Army. I remember one time we couldn't go to school because that's when they started doing the busing thing, moving African American kids weren't allowed to go to the white schools, previously to that. And then they were allowed to go to the white schools and vice versa. And then they started the mandatory busing thing to get some of the racial disparity in some of these schools taken care of. I remember our school buses being set on fire to stop kids from being able to be dropped off at a different school. So it has been this way before. It's disappointing to me, but not shocking.
Well, how do you see this playing out based on that historical stance that we're coming from here?
Well, I kind of hope that what happened in the 70s happens again. People get tired of that crap. They get tired of living that way, realizing the message that some of these people are pushing is false. quite a few of the people who are out there causing trouble right now in the cities, basically, it's a thinly veiled, low-grade communist insurgency. They want to replace the government with one that they think is a lot more utopian and bring about socialism. So, they give it a nicer name, democratic socialism, but whatever. If we look at history, it's a failed philosophy that where everywhere that has been tried, it fails miserably, brings a whole lot of unhappiness to people. I find it interesting that my friends who are from places, I have a friend, Venezuela, several Russian friends, Brazil, Poland, the Ukraine, places like that. They've lived in communist or socialist societies, and they're just beside themselves that anybody would be stupid enough to volunteer for that.
Completely agree. Now, the interesting thing is, right on the news right now, they're talking about in Seattle how the officials have brought in concrete barriers to this Chaz protest zone. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but me being an outsider and non-law enforcement, it kind of blows me away that it's like a surrender of that precinct area. And then as they surrender, they're bringing in these concrete walls. These guys are usually against walls as far as I remember. But
Yeah.
what is your take on that? I mean, literally, to me, that's just pure surrender.
Well, I'll say I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican, and I think there's warts on both those parties. But
Sure.
I find it amusing the level of Trump derangement syndrome that comes from folks that are involved in stuff like that. And they lose their minds when Trump is talking about building a wall. And what's one of the first things they did in Seattle? Put a wall around their little compound area. I think irony of this sort of thing is lost on a lot of people. I will tell you that once they let that happen, it's going to be very, very ugly if they decide to undo that. They got to unring that bell, as it were. I don't know if you're familiar with the term Dane Geld.
No, I'm not.
So back in the days, the Vikings, are famous for attacking people, and they had various names, but some of them were Danes. And they're the names of where they were from, like the Norsemen. That's a transliteration of Northmen, but like the Normandy area of France is where some of them settled. They just took over and they stayed there. But there's a saying that once you pay the Dane Geld, it's tough to get rid of the Dane. So that you would pay the Vikings basically, because they would attack and they would loot and pillage and stuff. Well, then they decided what they would do is basically extort people. Hey, if you pay us, we won't loot your city. So people would pay the Dane Geld to keep the Vikings from looting their city. And of course, the Vikings are going to come back again and again and again because once you start appeasing people, they expect you to keep doing that sort of thing.
Well, and I just still, I know you said you're not Democrat or Republican. I understand you there completely. But I do just wonder what kind of leadership would tell the officers to leave the precinct. I mean, am I misunderstanding that? It just seems that they would have
My
enough
understanding
force.
is one of the Seattle City Council women had a key, or it may have been the city hall. I may have that wrong, but actually let a bunch of the protesters in one of those buildings. And I'm making, you can't see the air quotes I'm making when I say protesters. There's people like Dr. King were protesters. What we see a lot of is people throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks and burning down Wendy's and things like that. That's not a protest. That's a riot. That's a rioter. The mamby-pamby language we're seeing in the media for these descriptions is just, it's very Orwellian. I've said several times in the past few weeks, the book 1984 was not supposed to be a how-to manual. It was supposed to be a cautionary tale. But yeah, the whole war is peace, love is hate, kind of like doublespeak BS that we're seeing nowadays. George Orwell, I bet, is spinning in his grave.
Oh yeah, I keep calling the media and others, not just the media, but it's the ministry of truth. Right now we've got cops and live PD being pulled off live streaming services. To me, that's book burning. That's the equivalent, in my opinion. And it really is, like I said, it's the ministry of truth going on. Let's get rid of the history and change the future by changing the past. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, of course, these riots beginning with the officer killing there in Minneapolis, and here this weekend we've got Rayshard Brooks being shot by an officer in a real rough fight, which is what I saw. And here we're using this as another example of police brutality. What?
Yeah. So a couple of things. You can't lump a lot of this stuff together. A lot of this started in Ferguson with the Michael Brown deal, which was the whole hands up, don't shoot is a false narrative. It was a lie created out of whole cloth.
Yes.
So Michael Brown was a felon. He had just committed a robbery, and then he violently attacks Officer Darren Wilson in his police car, hitting him in the face hard enough to cause a orbital fracture in his face. And at one point is grabbing his gun. A lot of people never saw in the media that Michael Brown's DNA was recovered from the officer's gun. Can anybody explain to me how that happened if he was standing there with his hands in the air begging not to be shot? I'll wait for somebody to come up with a valid explanation. Another thing a lot of people don't know is one of Darren Wilson's bullets went through Michael Brown's arm and then impacted the inside of the driver's side door inside his police car.
That's right.
So
I remember that. There's
only one way for that to happen, is that he was inside the car through the window beating the crap out of the officer. He's a much larger man than the officer was. So that entire thing was a false narrative. And then I also bring up that case because, we have idiots like Joe Biden saying, well, the police should just shoot people in the legs. Or why didn't you just shoot him in the arm? Well, Michael Brown was shot in the arm several times before he was struck fatally. So how did that work out? The cognitive dissonance, the Dunning-Kruger that is rampant in people making a commentary about things like this that they know literally nothing about is just stunning. So anyway, during the course of being I was actually at Ferguson for a while. I was working a gig where I was bodyguarding CNN reporters. And I had quite the educational experience in watching CNN reporters create propaganda. Did you watch any of the news and all the commentary and stuff back then about Ferguson at all?
Oh, 100%. I like a lot of people knew exactly what was going on, but keep it coming, Chuck.
So in Ferguson, you saw a lot of video of things like burning police cars. Would you care to guess how many police cars were burned up in that?
It sounds like you're saying quite a few.
Well, from the video, you would think like all of them, like they burned up like all the police cars, right? One.
Ah,
one police car.
movie magic, huh?
So what you do is if the car is the center of the clock, you set up your camera and your live feed, so you get background video of the car from all corners of the clock. 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So you have a burning car with a different background. So when you play that video, it looks like a different car. And you do that in the daylight, and you do that at night when it was burning. Then you do it the next day when it's not burning, and then you show that randomly when the newscasters are talking, and the people get the impression that, oh my God, they burned up all the police cars. So, and also found it illustrative that was a car was set on fire by an agitator who had been bussed in, and it was a skinny little white boy that set the police car on fire. There's a lot of professional paid agitators in incidents like this. And I think the people that do that learned a lot in the meantime, right up until Minneapolis happened, and then they had an excuse to do it again. I would like to say, make no mistake, I don't even know how to say his name, Officer Chauvin, I guess.
Yes,
Minneapolis
yes.
PD,
Mm-hmm.
the dude that put his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck and stayed there. I did not have to watch that video. I didn't have to watch the whole video. I did not have to watch that video for more than a few minutes. So one of the reasons we're talking is, I'm well known as being a subject matter expert on things like police use of force,
Yes.
etc. I've been in state court, federal court, and been certified as an expert witness in this area. Decades of experience as a use of force trainer. And I could tell you immediately my opinion was that was, in fact, excessive force. It was grossly excessive force. It was punitive and gratuitous. If I would have been the chief of police of Minneapolis, the minute I saw that video, I would have taken a few of my guys to go find Officer Chauvin and immediately arrested him for aggravated battery, and would have booked him in right then and there. There was some delay in the police process. They have to wait for the autopsy. Do we have a murder? What is, because basically the way the system works in the United States, if the coroner says it's a homicide, it's a homicide. If he says it's a heart attack, it's a heart attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way that works. So they were waiting to see if it was going to be ruled a homicide. Well, you don't need that. He committed an aggravated battery, and in this case, under the color of law. So it's a civil rights violation. The Minneapolis leadership could have done something immediately and maybe help mitigate this problem. But what I find is, in a lot of these cities that are poorly run, and a lot of these police departments that have that type of city leadership, to survive, the police chiefs are politicians themselves. They're appointed. They're appointed by their mayors. They're appointed by the city councils. So to survive, they become politicians themselves. They have to toe the party line, whatever that happens to be. So what they tend to do is not be able to think very hard for themselves. And I find that in a lot of these cases, what law enforcement leadership lacks is courage. Courage to do the right thing at the right time. The courage to say what needs to be said when it needs to be said. To tell the truth when it needs to be told, no matter how harsh that truth is. So I think they were wondering what to do next, dithered, to steal a term from one of my other mentors, John Farnham. Mm-hmm. And by the time they figured it out, they already had riots and things going. Imagine if they'd have held a press conference and people would have been demanding the arrest of the officer, and the chief would have been able to say, well, we booked him in 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Now what? But I do want to say, what people make this out to be, it is not. What we saw, thankfully, is an aberration. It was a rare, aberrant deviant act. You can't paint a entire profession. And I've seen estimates. There's no hard numbers because there's so many little police departments, and there's state, federal, city, county. You got police, you got sheriffs, you got federal agents, you got town constables, things like that. But there's somewhere around 500,000 law enforcement officers in the United States. They're all brutal. They're all racist. The men are racist. The women are racist. The African Americans are racist. I've worked with guys at my old job that were white, black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Egyptian, guy from China. I can't. One of the dudes that was working on my squad was remember the Vietnamese boat lift thing after the Vietnam War, all the people trying to escape from the Vietnamese communists. He came over on one of those boats as a little baby, as parents escaped Vietnamese communism on a sinking boat, So he was on my job. I had a guy working for me who basically came over as an illegal alien when he was 13 years old, and then eventually worked his way through the system, got his citizenship, things like that. So I work with a lot of people, a lot of diversity. You can't lump the cops. It's a broad spectrum of the human race, and for anybody to say otherwise, they're either utterly ignorant or purposefully lying, and you have to decide which one they're doing. I ask people all the time, with my background, my mom was German, my dad was Cherokee Indian. Do you think with my background and my experiences in life that I'm going to be exactly the same as one of the officers that you work for me? And Angie, she was a great, great, great street cop. But she was 5'3". She was Mexican, and she's a lesbian. So, really, are you going to say we are exactly the same? We have the same attitudes, the same mores, the same morals, the bullshit idea of blue code of silence, et cetera, et cetera. No, nothing could be further from the truth.
There's all kinds of ways to paint this, but in my lifetime at least, I'm 46, almost 47 years old. I've not seen in my lifetime so much of a stark reality that has been created before our eyes, and know that it's not even close to reality.
Well, what you're seeing is propaganda, and you're seeing effective propaganda. People forget that Mussolini was elected. People forget that Hitler was elected into power. He didn't shoot his way into power. He didn't take over violently. He got elected. Mussolini got elected. Sometimes people fall for the BS and support this kind of stuff. And it's pretty easy to galvanize people when you have a boogeyman that you can dehumanize. This is the sort of thing that we saw. We did our own propaganda. Look at World War II. Look at how we demonized the Japanese. It was perfectly acceptable to kill Japs. That was something you could come home and brag about, that sort of thing. And, it helped us win the war. But there's an object lesson to be learned there, and how you dehumanize people. It makes it very easy to visit violence upon them in this emotional hatred state that people work themselves up into.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of ways I want to go with this, but I think this would be a good next thing to cover here is that. Now, I definitely see you on social media and love seeing your commentary. What do you, in the current time, what do you think of police training, the level of training, and the skill level and preparedness of the general police force, again, in general?
Well, most places hire for people with clean backgrounds. There's a lot of places like, I have buddies that work in Tulsa. Tulsa won't even talk to you unless you have a bachelor's degree. That's how you get hired. And it's supposed to make for a superior officer. But, using Tulsa as a microcosm of that, what they get is people with minimal life experience, typical no military experience, college kids who have worked normally part-time because they were doing college full-time, that kind of thing. Don't have a lot of career experience, life experience, have had a pretty decent background and upbringing because that's why they have a clean background. So now they get hired and they get thrust into these scenarios. And I'll tell you what I tell people all the time. Policing is advanced adulting. You get called to places to adult for other people who cannot adult for themselves. And when you break down what a domestic disturbance is, a loud party call, dispute between neighbors, things like that, it's a failure to adult. So they get on 911 and are like, hey, nobody here can adult for themselves. We need somebody to come take care of that for us. And you get the 22, 23, 27-year-old kids that show up on these things, and they have to adult for other people who often have made a mess of their entire lives and want somebody to fix it right away. That's a pretty tall order for people to be able to pull off. So now, because of their background is squeaky clean, that's how they got hired, passed a background check, no criminal history, things like that. They often have no experience at dealing with people in these very rough circumstances, being cussed out, getting punched in the face. They've never been in a fight. I could tell you my current agency, had a pretty good young man that we wanted to hire. And Kansas Council Law Enforcement, or Kansas CPOST, it's Council Peace Officer Standards and Training is what that stands for, refused to allow us to hire this young man because he had a disorderly conduct ticket that he had pled guilty to because when he was 18 years old, he got into a fist fight at a softball game. So now he's barred from law enforcement for life, at least in Kansas.
Wow.
So that is the type of background thing that's how ridiculous it could be, actually keeping people out of police work. So the people that get hired in Kansas haven't even been in a fist fight at a softball game or anything like that, So now they get thrust into these circumstances in which they may be mentally and or physically unprepared for what they get themselves into. And then most departments train to check the box training, lowest common denominator training. A lot of agencies, a lot of departments that do academy training don't have any physical fitness requirements. So we have people that maybe they're out of shape. And so all of the training that they have, all of the fighting experience they have is what they learned in the academy. And I'll tell you, typically that's woefully inadequate. The average high school wrestler in his freshman year has probably several hundred more hours than a police officer does in learning to grapple with another human being. And nobody thinks a freshman high school wrestler is going to be at the top of his game. Just to kind of put some numbers into context there.
Wow.
So what we have is people who are barely trained, just enough to get by, just enough to take the liability as best they can off of the agency and put it on the officer. So now when the officer screwed up, they can say, well, we trained you. And we're seeing that in Atlanta right now. The two young men that went to the Wendy's to deal with the guy passed out in the drive-through lane, they weren't out there looking for trouble. They got called. They go, hey, we got a drunk guy passed out in our drive-through lane. Can the police come take care of that? And a lot of the people that denigrate the police keep talking about this thing, de-escalation, de-escalation, de-escalation. I've been to several instructor schools on this kind of thing. I will tell you, what you cannot do is de-escalate other people.
Yeah.
They have to want to agree to de-escalate. Now, you don't want to escalate things, call people names, cuss them out, have a crappy tone of voice, denigrate them. You want to show people, basic human respect. So there's that. So you don't want to escalate, but I can't point my magic wand at you and say de-escalate, and it's going to become nonviolent. It only works if the other guy agrees to it. Well, in the case in Atlanta, they talked to that young man 34 minutes right in there. I can tell you back in the day, that wouldn't have been a shooting. Do you want to know why that would not have been a shooting?
Why is that?
Because drunk guy would have got pancaked in the first 2 or 3 minutes by, some gruff old cops that didn't have time for his BS.
Yeah.
And then he would have went to jail or to the drunk tank in handcuffs instead of getting shot dead. One of my axioms of life is that if you have to use force, use it early and use it effectively. If you use enough force early, you don't have to use more force later to dig your way out of a hole. Are you familiar with the Kyle Dinkheller video? The Deputy Dinkheller several years ago stopped a guy that started cussing him out, said he was a Vietnam veteran, eventually went back to his truck, got an M1 carbine, and the video ends with Kyle Dinkheller losing a gunfight, screaming, and eventually being shot dead.
Oh, yeah. Tom Givens shows that at a lot of his classes, and yes, it's
very
riveting
video.
And
so a lot of people will fixate on why, the guy's reaching in the truck for the gun. Why didn't he shoot him? He should have shot him now. He should have shot him sooner, yada, yada, yada. Okay. What if I told you there didn't have to be a gunfight at all? Kyle Dinkheller was a big dude when the guy that said he was a Vietnam veteran was all dancing and talking crazy, and he rushed at him and started cussing him out. That's an assault on a law enforcement officer. Even if Kyle had no skills, he was a big dude. Let's say he had picked that guy up in a big bear hug and ran over to the ditch and then just fell on top of him and smashed him. Would there have been a gunfight?
No,
there wouldn't have been a gunfight. What if he had pulled out his pepper spray and sprayed the guy down and then grabbed him in an arm bar, escorted him over, put him in the grass, and put handcuffs on him? Would we have had a gunfight? No.
Nope.
He did whack him with his little crappy ASP baton. I'm not a fan of those expandables, particularly ASP makes junk, and their training system is junk. But I'm going off on a rant here. He whacked him once. That's ineffective force. It's not enough force. All he did was make the guy mad, and he stormed off to his truck to get his M1 carbine. I'm going to show you. So let's take the Atlanta event, because I've seen this over and over and over again. If those two officers had just gang piled this dude, everybody would have been, oh my God, look at them. They're just assholes. They just jumped on that guy for no reason. There was no need for all that. This is what happens when you don't use enough force early correctly. It de-evolves into a much more violent event, and somebody ends up having to grab a gun to save their life, or because they perceive they need to save their life, right? A lot of people are making a lot of commentary about, well, he just had a taser, where there was two officers. There was, okay. Looking at the video from multiple angles, there was the one officer was still down. He wasn't even in the picture. when the foot chase occurred, the guy turned around with the taser, fired the taser off. I'll tell you what happened. The young man that was chasing him, profiling, I know cops aren't supposed to do that, but profiling human behavior, he was chasing the guy. He saw him turn and point a pistol-shaped object at him. Even though he knew it was a taser, he pointed a pistol-shaped object at him. It makes a pop, and I have had people on the street in the past when tasers were used who thought the police just fired a shot. So it's common to think when a taser pops that somebody just fired a pistol. So the officer fired back just out of reflex. People are making a lot of hay about that. I am told, and I'm still confirming that they in fact have the 2-shot tasers instead of the 1-shot tasers. But quite frankly, if just out of the blue you appeared 15 feet in front of me, pointing a taser at me, and you were going to pull the trigger, and I could get to my gun in time, I would shoot you because I don't know what your intentions are. The taser is not a lethal weapon used correctly, but I have been tasered, and basically it paralyzes you for a full 5 seconds. So you can do nothing. If the officer had been incapacitated, he would have been laying there with his pistol up for grabs or whatever the other guy wanted to do. So, is this one of those shootings that I think is right on the edge? Yeah, I do. I think that just looks ugly. Overall, it's a bad deal. But do I think it's within the Graham and Garner decisions that the Supreme Court came down with? Yep, I do. One of my favorite quotes to come out of the Supreme Court was Oliver Wendell Holmes in the Brown v. U.S. case, which had to do with civilian self-defense. And it had to do with the use of gunfire to defend yourself against a knife. So the gentleman was charged with murder because the other guy just had a knife, so you didn't have to shoot him. He was 10 feet away. We know better than that now, but Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated in the court's opinion, the court cannot demand detached reflection in the face of an upraised knife. The court cannot demand detached reflection in the face of an upraised knife. So
in other words, third-party judgment?
Well, you can't expect people to go, oh, gee, that guy's got a knife. He's advancing on me. What should I do? What is my best option? What is my least invasive option? All they require you to be as a civilian defender or as a law enforcement officer is to be reasonable. We have the reasonable man rule. We have the reasonable officer rule. Now, just because I might have handled it differently doesn't mean that another officer taking another course of action was necessarily wrong. The court doesn't ask you to be perfect. It doesn't ask you to use a minimum level of force. It asks you to use a reasonable level of force. So you asked me for a couple of predictions. The Atlanta officer, they're going to charge him because it's a political stunt. He's going to be found not guilty. People are going to lose their minds over that. I suspect reading the autopsy out of the Minneapolis deal, where they can't really point to the knee on the neck as a cause of death. Because unfortunately, Mr. Floyd, his lifestyle was not conducive to his health. We know he had heart issues. He had meth on board. He had fentanyl on board. So unfortunately, he wasn't a really healthy dude. If he had gone for a jog that morning, he might have fallen over and died from a heart attack. Who's to say? But he just wasn't very healthy. So I strongly suspect that there's a possibility that Officer Chauvin will not be found guilty of a murder charge, perhaps something lesser, aggravated battery, some civil rights violation, etc. But there won't be a quote unquote murder, and people are going to lose their minds over that as well. Which is why I think the showboating of the DA in the Minneapolis case serves no one well. uh, because he's going for a charge clearly not supported under Minneapolis or under Minnesota state law. He's just grandstanding. So,
which kind of goes against the normal rule of prosecution, bringing charges that that you can win on.
yeah, except when it's in your political best interest.
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of this. There's been a lot of this kind of thing. Janet Reno, who eventually worked for Bill Clinton, was a prosecutor in Miami who, after a riot in the 80s, after a police shooting, charged the officer with murder, knowing full well that it was a BS charge and it was a wrongful prosecution. But this segues into another thing just real fast. A lot of people are on right now about qualified immunity, and they should rewrite the law so the cops don't have that. Qualified immunity does not cover the cops in a criminal case. A lot of people think they know what qualified immunity is. They do not. I will tell you what prosecutors have, though, and that is absolute immunity. Absolute immunity. They can withhold evidence, not tell you about things that, like, let's say you are the one being charged. They're supposed to give you all their evidence for their case. Well, if they withhold that, they can cause a mistrial or, other legal procedures. But you know what doesn't happen is they can't be sued for it and they can't go to jail for it because they have absolute immunity. If people knew the shenanigans that prosecutors and judges were able to pull off, they wouldn't blame so much of this stuff on the police because it's, quite frankly, the police at the street level are just one branch of the criminal justice system, which is, has quite a few fleas on it right now, I think. Yeah.
Well, this brings to my mind an hypothetical question here. Say I'm an officer. I've been on the job for about 10 years. I've done everything I can to do the best job I can. And, of course, putting bad guys in jail. But now I have a traffic stop, right, and have no idea that it's going to go terrible and I'm going to have to use deadly force. And so now, of course, I'm threatened with at least my career possibly ending, and with the media onslaught like Betty Shelby and all the other officers in recent memory. And then now we've got what seems to be, again, I could be wrong historically, but it seems to be a high risk of being charged with murder. I'll tell you what, if I'm that officer, I'm looking for another career. How do you think that's going? Do you think there's going to be a greater exodus from the profession?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think guys that can pull the pin financially, let's say because in a lot of places you might be vested in 10 years or 15 years or whatever, they're going to leave. They're going to get out. If they can get out, they're going to get out. I have probably a dozen friends at my former job who are telling me the very second they can bail, they're gone.
Wow.
It's going to seriously harm recruiting. People are not going to put in you can't hire people that don't apply. Recruiting in law enforcement was already very problematic. I'll point out I saw something from the Joint Chiefs of Staff a 3 years ago where they were briefing Congress that they were having recruiting issues. And part of the problem was the state of young people in our nation. Like you are barred from being in the U.S. Army if you ever been on one of several meds, like for ADD, ADHD, things like that. You're not eligible to be recruited. So when they look at the pool of potential young people who are in the age range for military service, I'm just going to pick a number out of a hat. Let's say that's 50 million. Immediately, 25 million of them aren't qualified for service at all. They have health problems, they have criminal history, they have drug issues, psychological issues, whatever the case may be, or they're simply not physically fit enough to be valid for military service. So that puts the armed services in a real bind for they're all competing for the same people. Well, if you look at emergency services, the police, the fire, the emergency medical services, they're looking to hire from the same pool of people. So it's a diminishing pool, it's a shrinking pool, people who are qualified and able. And now you have people who may be qualified and able but aren't willing, because who wants to put up with this kind of crap? I used to be quite the recruiter for my old department. I would look for and encourage people with leadership skills, with some fire in their belly, that kind of thing, to put in for, police service or fire service. Now, I cannot, in good conscience, recommend a young person start a career as a police officer. It's sad for me to say.
And you mentioned firefighters. Do you have any similar concerns for them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be the cops had to scrounge for recruits. And when, like the local fire guys, when they held a fire entrance exam, and then they would have the physical fitness test and, all that stuff to start the hiring process, there would be hundreds of people show up for that. And now it's a few dozen. They have the fire departments and the fire service in general. A lot of fire departments are volunteer, having a great deal of difficulty having enough people to man the trucks, to man the stations they need to man. It's the same with EMS. The ambulance people are horrendously overworked. A lot of the a lot of the fire and EMS people work 24-hour shifts, kind of a traditional thing in the fire service. But what isn't traditional is the nonstop first responder medical calls. So you might work 24 hours and get 2 hours sleep, which means when you're driving, your reflexes and your judgment, it means you're functionally about the same as being, DUI, being drunk driving. And then you're supposed to put up with that indefinitely. People they're not signing up for the fire service. They're not signing up for the recruiting, for the tests. And then even more so in the police world right now.
It's definitely not a good time. And I know this is a real loaded question, and we could talk for a long time on it, but just real quick, why do you think this is going on right now?
I think it's a little bit of a perfect storm. You may have noticed everybody was on edge with all the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Certainly.
I noticed in my area during the lockdown, when everybody was supposed to stay home, there was fewer cars on the road, but the cars that were on the road were driving distracted, and they were driving much more aggressively. I know some cops over in Kansas City, Missouri. They had a car stop on the highway over there, 65-mile-an-hour zone, had this guy at 134 miles an hour. People are just driving crazy. There was a line in the movie Body Heat, which is going way back, in which one of the detectives talked about a heat wave that was going on during the course of that movie, talked about how when things get to a certain level, people start to act like or think the old rules don't apply. So under COVID, we kept getting hit with these messages. I forget the name of the movie Roddy Piper was in, where he was the only guy that could see that there was aliens controlling, the politicians and the media and things like
Buckaroo Banzai?
No.
Okay.
His famous line, "I came here to kick ass and chew gum, and I'm all out of bubble gum." So they live. That was it. So I just use my magic Google box.
Awesome.
People act like we're getting sent in that movie. You get these subliminal messages all over the place on the TV. Stay in line. Obey your alien overlords, etc. Well, we're kind of getting hit with that kind of thing. Stay home, save lives, stay 6 feet apart. Yada yada yada. Some of it's good. Some of it's crap. But we get hit constantly lately with the message, this is the new normal. This is the new normal. This is the new normal. Okay, so like in the movie Body Heat, the old rules don't apply anymore. So what's normal now? People been on edge. But I will tell you, like the Antifa, folks like that, they were waiting for a trigger event. You don't come up with the numbers of people, piles of bricks, radios, the means to bus people in or carpool people in, and organize like that. That was not a spontaneous uprising or protest event. By any means. So it was a pretty heinous event. Officer Chauvin really, really, really screwed up.
He really handed it to him, didn't he?
I don't know if he's an idiot or if he's that big of an asshole. But either way, thanks a lot, dude.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what he's thinking right now.
Man. Right now, quite frankly, I think he's probably on the lucky to be alive list. I imagine he was on suicide watch. Life as he knows it will never be the same again, and he has no one to blame but himself.
That's right.
But be that as it may, this whole two wrongs don't make a right thing, that's going on right now. The propaganda is that the police are inherently racist, inherently brutal. They're just killing people at a cyclic rate that don't need to be killed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I will tell you, in police shootings, I'll just use police shootings. You are about as likely to die in a police shooting as you are to die historical odds of being killed by lightning. How many people sit up at night worried about being killed by lightning? I mean, seriously, how many people sit around and worry about that? Oh my God, lightning's going to get me any day now.
It's been an awful long time since I've worried about it.
Yeah. So, and that disregards the fact that the vast majority of the people shot dead by the police really needed to get shot. Even people who hate the police, when I have conversations with them, they will begrudgingly admit that sometimes there's no choice. Something that was pretty heinous. Remember the Pulse nightclub shooting?
Oh, definitely.
Terrorist dude goes in there shooting everybody. I think he threw a couple of pipe bombs around, leaving bodies everywhere. That dude right there. Does anybody doubt that the police needed to shoot that dude? No, nobody disagrees. They needed to shoot that dude. They needed to shoot that dude as quickly as possible. Shoot that guy right now. So now that we agree that sometimes that's necessary, the only thing we're debating is, where is the line drawn? Whenever you use force, it's not a Jackie Chan movie. It's always ugly. It's never smooth. It never looks like TV. And that's part of the problem is most people's actual experience with real violence doesn't exist. They see it on TV. They see it on the movies. They watch cop shows. So they think they know something about something and they don't. I would invite anybody who thinks it's easy to arrest a person that doesn't want to be arrested and put handcuffs on them against their will because they don't want to go, to check in at your local Jiu-Jitsu Dojo and try some jiu-jitsu if you've never done it before. And you will quickly find that even though you are rolling with another white belt, that it is not as easy as you might think it might be.
That's
Right.
right. That's
And
right.
that person is being competitive, but is in fact not actually trying to hurt you, because that's kind of the little agreement we have when we're doing stuff in the dojo. I'm not going to hurt you. You're not going to hurt me, but we're going to practice this stuff. There's a level of trust involved there. When you're on the street, there's no level of trust. Dude might try to kill you in the middle of all this. And people certainly fight dirty, sucker punch, stab, pull guns, things like that. So the idea that the police are out there just nonstop, unjustly killing people is completely false. It's completely false. It is quickly demonstrated by the stats. There's hundreds of millions of police citizen involvements or contacts every year. And in less than 1% of them is any force of any kind used. And the vast majority of that time is there's something like they muscle you into cuffs because you don't want to go, because you want to resist arrest, or you get pepper sprayed or something like that. Shootings, they're not even statistically significant as far as the numbers of, the type of thing we're talking about.
When we're talking about interactions with civilians and police officers.
Yeah. People may not realize we're the third most populous country on the planet. There's China, there's India, then there's us. We're well above 330 million people in the United States. 330 million. And the number of police fatal force incidents that occur every year is something like 1 to 2,000 total.
Wow.
And in fact, civilians legally kill more bad guys than the cops do every year. And I'm talking about, legitimate burglars climbing through grandma's window and she shoots him with a .22 rifle, that kind of thing, legitimate self-defense shootings.
Wow.
Yeah. Tens of thousands of people are killed in traffic accidents every year. Nobody loses any sleep about that. And again, the vast majority of the time when the police use force, are there bad incidents? Yeah, but it's an aberrant event. Should it happen? No. But, unfortunately, when we're talking about police recruiting, they recruit from the human race, and humans are fallible. So, that is what it is. Some things shouldn't happen, but should child porn exist? No. Should people smoke crack? No. Should people beat their spouse? No. Should you kick your dog? No. But all those things happen. That's one of those things. We go for zero. We strive for perfection. And we have checks and balances in the system to correct a problem or try to remediate a problem once it goes bad. And, Officer Chauvin, he really screwed up. That was some criminal conduct. What happened to him? He's in jail. Mm-hmm. He's being charged with murder. Another case that happened here a while back that was an anomaly that was like really glaring. Remember the case? I think it was 3 or 4 years ago where a guy fought the cop, was running away with the taser, and truly running away. He was carrying it, not trying to use it. And the guy burned about 14 rounds at his back and shot the guy running away.
Wow. Yeah, I don't recall that.
Yeah, that one was captured on cell phone video. That officer, people were up in arms about that. What happened to that officer? Found guilty of murder. There's checks and balances in the system to deal with these aberrant events when they unfortunately happen.
Yes.
But casting this as being common, it's not common. Casting it as being systemic, it's not systemic. All of those are lies. They're being perpetrated right now. Mm-hmm. That's full on propaganda.
Well, and we circle back to this definitely being an Orwellian allegory for sure. Now, Chuck, we've had you on for a little over an hour now, and I told you we'd try and keep it around there, but I do
Okay.
not want to let you off without at least going over pepper spray. I know this is kind of a big topic change, but
Okay.
your knowledge is fascinating about it. Now, of course, I tell a lot of people that the most important things, the most important ninja moves you can do, you can't even hold in your hands. But then we're talking about, of course, situational awareness and verbalization.
Uh-huh.
But then in between that and something that you can hold in your hand is pepper spray. And I often tell people I'd rather you get pepper spray and then worry about getting a gun and learn how to use it. What are your thoughts on that? And give our audience a little bit of background, regarding your experience with pepper spray. And
So in police work, when I hired on, 87, cops carried revolvers and a stick and handcuffs. And we went out there and we were supposed to, uphold truth, justice, and the American way, crush crime and or evil. And so they wanted to lower smacking people with a big stick or a flashlight leaves them bruised up. Sometimes you break bones, things like that. A lot of people want to talk about empty hand skills. I got empty hand skills. I'm not a small guy. My prime, I was 6'2", 240 pounds. I had a deadlift over 500 pounds. I had good cardio. I could run my 2 mile for the military or for my SWAT team in under 13 minutes, typically right around 12:30. I was a pretty formidable guy. Had some fighting skills, things like that. But I could tell you when you do jiu-jitsu on the pavement, everybody gets skinned up. And then you have things like blood transfer and bodily fluids and that sort of thing. I have an elbow that doesn't work right anymore from non-prescribed contact with the pavement in the middle of a fight, tackling a guy. So if I can do something that's less violent, that means he doesn't get hurt, I don't get hurt, and nobody gets skinned up. We don't have any blood contamination, things like that. Why would I not choose that option? So about 1988, pepper spray was introduced at my old department. I was one of the test officers that had that. There were 10 of us, and they put it out on the street. We had to fill out reports on what would be now a use of force report. But back then, we didn't do that sort of thing. It was just a pepper spray report. So we had the product Capstun. It was pretty good pepper spray. And it turned out to be really effective. So they implemented it department-wide, and people started to use it. We were encouraged to use it early because the idea was once you're grappling with somebody, there's no chance to use it. Now you're all tangled up, or maybe you're fighting on the ground or whatever. So try to use it early at the point that you could articulate reasonable belief that the suspect had resisted or was going to resist. Say you tell a guy, sir, you need to turn around, put your hands behind your back. You got a warrant for your arrest. We're going to have to go downtown. And he says, F you, I'm not going to do it. Well, instead of grabbing that guy, we were supposed to go to pepper spray. And what we found was that actually worked. Probably 9 out of 10 times it took the fight out of the fighter, and no higher level of force was needed to get them into custody. We could kind of muscle them into cuffs, take them to the jail, get them hosed off, book them in. I didn't get beat up. They didn't get beat up. I didn't get scraped up. They didn't get scraped up. Our emergency room visits dropped. Our injured suspects dropped 90%. Our injured officers' work comp dropped 90%. Well, that's also that's being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, because every time the cops take a suspect to the emergency room, who pays for that?
taxpayers.
You do. Every time a cop files for workman's comp and has to get fixed, who pays for that? You do. Taxpayers pay for that. When I used to when I had to get in a fight and I like tear the knees out of end up on the ground, I tear up a pair of uniform pants. Taxpayers pay for that. So if you can avoid all that, why would you not? So we started using pepper spray, and we use it, quite frankly, a lot. And we found it to be super effective. Eventually went through several other products when I left, and to this day, they're still using the Sabre Corporation product, Sabre Red, 1.33% major capsicum content. We found that to be a superb product. Very, very good pepper spray. Generally recommend Sabre to my non-law enforcement people who are looking for a defensive tool. And I think it's a good tool for people. I have done pepper spray training for people as young as junior high school. So when you think about it, if you have a daughter, let's say she's in ninth grade, and sometimes she has to be home by herself. In a lot of places, you can't legally make sure she's got a gun available, or if she's out and about if she's old enough to be out and about by herself or out running around with her friends. Can she carry a gun? No, can't legally carry a gun. No way around that. Most places can't get concealed carry till you're 21 years of age. But so what's a young adult to do? 18, 19, 20 years old. What can they legally carry? Pepper spray is a pretty good option. And it's very socially acceptable. A young lady can have a pepper spray, one of them keychain type deals, in their hand walking out to their car. Nobody thinks anything of it. You can't walk out to the car, the proverbial dark parking lot. You can't walk out to your car with a pistol in your hand. They'll call the SWAT team on you. So overall is something that fits into people's lives. Personal experience in spraying, literally hundreds of bad guys, a couple of thousand students in law enforcement training. I've personally been sprayed with most of the major brands out on the market, almost every major brand on the market. I've been sprayed in training more than 60 times. So I got a pretty good depth of experience with this stuff. It's a good product. It's in general. Now, that said, it's easy to buy bad pepper spray. There's a lot of crap out there because there's no controlling authority for quality control on pepper spray, except for bear spray, which is very highly regulated by the EPA. There's very stringent criteria they have to be able to claim to be selling you bear spray. But the stuff it's supposed to spray people with, yeah, some of the brands out there, the quality control is abysmal. But when you look at it, it's pretty safe. Oleoresin capsicum is typically derived from cayenne peppers. So what we're talking about is the same stuff that goes into a lot of things like Tabasco, various hot sauces, Louisiana hot sauce, things like that. So it's basically a weaponized food condiment, is what law enforcement found it to be, both effective and very, very safe. Extraordinarily safe use of force option. And then so for people who aren't cops, I think it's an even better option for less than lethal situations, because the advantage that non-cops have over cops is once you spray a dude, you don't have to go run up and put handcuffs on him. You can get away. So that's an advantage.
Well, I have to say, unfortunately, my twin brother and co-host, and then, of course, Brian, my other co-host, they aren't with us tonight. But I did want to say I first got into using pepper spray when my twin brother, who has multiple black belts and has significant training in jiu-jitsu and other arts, and, of course, firearms, and he's a veteran, etc., but one of his number one things to have in his pocket is his pepper spray. And I learned from that real quick. And I've been carrying pepper spray with me for years. And, I work in a non-permissive environment, and it really is a greater risk that I would be found out with a pistol than have to use it in my work environment. But you can be sure that I have a can of pepper spray in my pocket.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's okay because it's socially acceptable. How many young ladies have one on a keychain in their purse? Typically it's a crappy unit and they don't know how to use it and they don't even know if it works anymore. But the fact that it's there and it's socially acceptable speaks to that. Your ability to have that with you pretty, outside of getting on an airplane or something like that, dang near all the time.
Yeah. Well, and to give an example too, my brother reminded me before we got on that he saw you in And I think probably it sounds like an ECQC class where you used pepper spray in a muck situation.
Yeah, you can. If you're working with Craig and you got the inert tools and you want to try to use them in that scenario, he'll allow you to do that.
Yeah, he said he thought that was pretty cool. Now, just one question. I'm going to let you get going here. Now, I can tell you like to read a lot, so I'm sorry. I'm gonna take that off the table. Here's the personal question: what is it that you enjoy spending your time doing when you're not doing all this martial arts stuff and putting bad guys in jail?
I'm a big student of history, which I mean goes back to reading, but
That's
also
all right. If you want to break the rules, you go ahead, buddy.
but I also so I was actually born in Germany, and I've been back and forth. I've been to Europe. I've been to a lot. I've been to different countries, and I love history. I love when I was a kid going to the castles over in Europe, and then having a sense of where we came from and how we got to be where we are now, because that helps explain things. And it kind of speaks to our situation now. When we started this conversation, we've never seen anything like this before. Well, yeah, we have. Late '60s, early '70s, and then pre-World War II. How did Mussolini and Hitler end up in power? Riots, depression. People were very unhappy, etc. So studying history, but then going to the places. I love to travel. I like to hike, camp, hunt when I can, that kind of thing. But getting into the outdoors, that's pretty zen for me, makes me happy. And then anytime I can visit some place of historical significance, museum, castle, around here in Kansas, like here in Topeka, is where the Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth Military Road went through. General Custer stayed here. A lot of your luminaries of the Old West, Buffalo Bill, Wild Bill Hickok, all of those guys went through here, because we got the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Santa Fe Trail go right through here. So there's spots not too far from where I'm sitting right now, where there's some trails in the woods where you can do jogging, hiking, things like that in one of the parks here, and you can walk in the ruts of the Oregon Trail. And I just find it fascinating, the thousands of people that, gambled it all. You think about putting everything you own in a wagon, and you have to make it from Westport over by Kansas City to the other side of the Rocky Mountains before you get snowed in, and you end up like the Donner Party. How much fortitude people had to have back then to take on those life adventures. I just find that kind of thing really fascinating.
Oh yeah, that is amazing. So, well, amazing talk, Chuck. I mean, you did not disappoint. Thanks so much again for coming on and spending time with us. I mean, again, you're supporting us by coming on and having a chat with us, and I hope sometime soon, when our company gets to maybe TACCOM, we'll get to hang out and chat more.
Well, I wanted to kind of jump on this opportunity. So one of the Russian counterterrorism units that responded to Beslan, I learned their motto in Russian, which I can't pronounce, is "If not me, then who?" So a lot of my life I've spent if not me, then who's going to do it? Who's going to respond to that wreck? Who's going to stop that artery from bleeding? Things like that. And in this case, if I don't speak up, who's going to? And there's so much disinformation. And, I like to say that you need to be the lack of bullshit you wish to see in the world. Mm-hmm. So having the opportunity to come on and just kind of talk about some of this stuff, it was my pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck. And is there anything you have going on? Any places that you want to send listeners to get a hold of you?
So I'm I'm kind of a Luddite, and I have trouble with technology. Need to update my website, but I'm about to put some classes on my calendar, agiletactical.com, where I'll be doing like one of my trademark classes is small pistol and snub revolver skills. I'll be teaching in Racine, Wisconsin, Racine County Line Rifle Club. I'll be teaching down in the Nashville area. I'm being invited to teach at Revolver Roundup with Wayne Dobbs and Daryl Bulkley again in the Dallas area. That's a very well received weekend of just revolver training. Kind of a anachronistic, but it's a really really good time. I'm getting more requests for pepper spray. Probably going to be doing one of my non-law enforcement instructor courses in the Dallas area.
Oh, wow. That's close to me.
Had another request to come back to Shawnee, Oklahoma. Probably going to do that down there. I think people are a lot. I had to cancel a bunch of stuff. I had 5-6 different classes I had to cancel because of the COVID. People were locked down. You can't have more than 10 people. That kind of thing, just like TACCon got canceled. And now people are they're kind of uneasy, and they're requesting, shotgun training, pistol training, pepper spray training, things like that. So I'm getting more requests, and that's some stuff I badly need to update my calendar.
Well, I'll look for your update on your calendar because it sounds like you're going to have a few classes that I'm interested in and within driving distance. So I'll keep my eye open for that too, Chuck. Thanks so much. A lot of fun, great conversation, and I'll go ahead and say goodnight, Chuck, and you have a good evening.
You too.
So, hey, Eric, pretty awesome info there from Chuck Haggard, wasn't it?
Man, I wish that I could have been on the interview, but I was able to hear the interview. Man, what an incredible amount of information and perspective. Chuck's articulation of both the problem and the history behind the problem is extremely compelling. Now, granted, you and I agree with him. It's like, as I thought about listening to his discussion with you, is that even, we're not going to convince people that, essentially hate the country, hate law enforcement. We're not going to convince them of anything. But for those on the fence, if they listen to what Chuck has to say, it's going to be hard to refute what he said, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. Like you said, I can't say it better, just extremely compelling. So I enjoyed a lot chatting with him. He's a great guy. And we look forward to sometime having him on again and getting to some of his classes because, like I said to him, there's some classes that are going to be close to me. And I definitely want to see what he does in his pepper spray instructor course. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, man. As I listened to that, I was like, as we do this, we continue to expand our network and the instructors that have taught us over the years that we never had any real interaction with for whatever reason. But then they go on the top of the list to make sure we hit up. And, Chuck is definitely on the top of the list. We're going to be in his classes or in a class or two ASAP for sure.
Well, Eric, speaking of all this info that we got to cover, audience, we're going to go ahead and not do our accountability this week, but we will certainly get caught up next week. I can tell you we're doing the work. I'm looking forward to hitting the gym tomorrow night with my wife, and on Friday after work, I'm going to go hit the range, hit the drill of the week, and I'll report back on it on our next episode. How's that sound, Eric?
Sounds good, man. Yeah, rest assured the EvoSec crew are getting after it. That's part of our accountability to you guys and to ourselves is that we're doing the work. So
yeah, and we'll look forward to hearing about Brian's work tonight too. So
yeah,
stay tuned.
Absolutely. Well, Aaron, I think we've taken our audience's time enough this evening, don't you think?
Yes, we've been here a good time. So let's go ahead and say goodnight.
All right. Have a good one, everybody out there. Stay safe.